Masechet Shevuot Daf Chaf Vav. Rabbi Ishmael Omer Eno Chayav Ela Al He'atid Lavo. We quote the Mishnah where Rabbi Ishmael says one is liable to bring a korban olev yored for a Shevuot bitui only if he says something about the future, like I will eat and he doesn't eat, or he says I will not eat and then he does eat, and then he violates it. So then he has to bring a korban olev yored. Only about the future, but about the past, if he says, I ate, and really he didn't eat, or the opposite, he does not bring a korban olev yored, according to the Bishmael. We now quote a badaita that will recite and analyze further the arguments that are already brought in the Mishnah. Tanur Banan, lehara o lehetib, en li ela devrim sheyesh behen hara'a v'hataba, she'en behen hara'a v'hataba minayin, tamud lomad o nefesh ki tishaba lebate bisfatayim. Baraita quotes this pasuk. Let's look at the pasuk inside because we're going to see it a few times. O nefesh ki tishabat lebate bisfatayim. We're going to see in a minute that this is a kalal, a person who makes a vow with an utterance of his lips. So that's talking about any vow. And then it gives a perat, lehara o lehetiv, a detailed description of for bad or for good. And then it brings another kalal, lechol asher yibate adam bishvuah v'ne'ela mimenu, or anything that he utters in a vow, and then he forgets about it. So it's have a kalal, perat, and a kalal. So let's see. First, we're going to see how Rabbi Akiba understands these words. So since it says la'ara o lehetib, I would think only if it's something that is regarding a morally bad or good vow. What about if it's not about something morally good or bad, just I will eat or not eat or something neutral? And that's why it says, O nefesh ki tishabat lebate bisfatayim. The opening words of the pasuk says, someone who utters an oath with his lips. So that includes other things. Fine. I know that this is true for things that are in the future. Lehara, something that I will do or will not do. What about for past? So then the next phrase comes and says anything that he utters with his lips. And that includes also the past. Rabbi Ishmael says no, only for the future, because the words to do bad or to do good are talking about in the future. Rabbi Akiba responds to Ishmael, if you're going to follow these words literally, then you're only going to have something that is a vow about a morally good or morally bad action. But what about if it's not morally good or morally bad? Would you not agree that one is liable even for other things? And Rabbi Ishmael says, from the amplification of the pasuk that it says lechol asher yivate anything. Amru lo, amar lo, im riba katub lekach. And Rabbi Akiba says, if you're going to include things based on these extra words, to include morally neutral things, anything that's just positive or negative, even not only good and bad, in that case, you may as well go ahead and include also things about the past. Okay, that's the Baraita. Now, Baraita doesn't add so much to what the Mishnah already said. So now the Gemara is going to analyze further. Shapir ka'amar le Rabbi Akiba le Rabbi Ishmael. Rabbi Akiba seems to have a good claim against Rabbi Ishmael. How could Rabbi Ishmael defend himself? Amar Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Ishmael sheshimesh et Rabbi Nechonia ben Akana shedoresh et kol Torah kola bechlal ufrat ihuna medarish doresh bechlal uferat. Rabbi Akiba sheshimesh et Nachum ish gam zo shehaya doresh et kol Torah kola beriba umi'aet ihuna midoresh riba so now we have a very important methodological principle that Rabbi Ishmael, he served under, meaning he studied under Rabbi Nechonia ben Hakana, and Rabbi Nechonia himself would analyze the entire Torah and explain it using the methodology of Kelal Uprat, general and specifics. So Rabbi Ishmael followed the same methodology. Rabbi Akiba, on the other hand, he served under Nachum Ish Gamza, and he analyzed the entire Torah and explained it based on Ribui and Mi'ut. Now, both of these are about general and specifics, but they work in different ways. So let's see how it applies to this case. My Rabbi Akiba darish Ribui Mi'ut. Let's see how Rabbi Akiba works first. Detanya, O nefesh ki tishaba riba, lahara o letiv mi'ayet, lechol asher ribate adam chazav riba, riba mi'ayet v'riba riba hakol. My riba kol mileh. My mi'et devad mitzvah. So the pasuk says, O nefesh ki tishaba. Again, as we said it before, O nefesh ki tishaba. This is a riboy. This is an inclusive term. And then lahara le'ativ is mi'ut, is a limiting term. Sounds like only that, only morally good and bad. And then said l'chol asher hibateh. So that's another riboy. And so whenever you have a riboy, mi'ut, and riboy, we're going to include everything except for one thing. So we're going to include everything. My riba, we're including all matters, future, past, everything. What are we excluding? Because there is an exclusionary term in the middle. We only exclude one thing, and that one thing is if someone makes a vow about a mitzvah, and he says, I am not going to put on tefillin tomorrow. So then that's devar mitzvah. That's null and void, that vow, and he should put on tefillin. And if he does put on tefillin, he's not violating any vow. So that's Rabbi Akiva. He includes everything, past and future, positive and negative, as long as it doesn't override a mitzvah. It's a valid vow. Rabbi Yishmael darish kelal uperat. O nefesh ki tishabal lebati b'sfatam kelal. Lara ulati perat. L'chol ashir b'tei adam chazar v'kalal. Kelal uperat uchalal. Iyat adan ela ka'ayin haperat. Ma perat meforash lehaba. Af kol lehaba. Rabbi Yishmael, he follows kelal uperat ukalal, which works in a similar way in that you have a generality, a particular and a generality. And when you have that, you do something. It doesn't exclude just one thing, as in Rabbi Akiva, but rather it's going to include only things that are similar to the detail. So you have the detail, you have that case, which is lahara or lehetiv. That will be something morally good and bad about the future. That's technically all that includes, but because you have a kalal in the front and back, we're going to say there's some essential feature about that, then we're going to generalize anything that has that essential feature. So what is that? Well, since the example is about the future, you know what? We're going to include anything about the future, even if it's not morally good and bad, all things about the future. And therefore, the kelal is going to include anything about the future, even if it's not about moral good or bad. Any vow about the future, positive or negative, is included. And the perat, the detail, is going to exclude something. That's going to exclude anything about the past. Even if it's about something morally good or bad, but it's about the past, that's not included, and one does not bring a korban for making a vow and violating that vow. Okay, ipuch ana, we ask about Rabbi Ishmael, why not switch it around? Why not say the kalal is coming to include things about the past, but it's coming to exclude anything that's not about morally good or bad? Maybe it means has to be morally good or bad about the future and the past, but if it's not morally good and bad, then that's excluded. Why do you decide to include this and exclude that? Why not the other way around? Amar Rabbi Yisrael, dumya de lehara o lehetiv. Mi she'isru mishum bal yachel devaro yatzeta zo she'en isru mishum bal yachel devaro el mishum bal teshakeru. Rabbi Yisrael explains that we want something that's the most similar to the perat, and just like the perat lehara, to do bad or to do good, is talking about something in the future. It has the same form as the pasuk in Bemidbar that says Bal Yachel Devaro. When a person makes a vow, he shall not desecrate it, make it whole. That's talking about something that you do in the future. Yachel, in the future. I make a vow right now and I say I am going to eat, so it's in my power to fulfill it or to desecrate it. I'm saying Hashem's name, it will desecrate it if I don't fulfill it. So lehara le'ativ is about the future, just like yachel is about the future. So that will exclude something that is not about the future, that is up to me to make it sacred or not sacred, but rather something about the past is bal teshakeru, is more similar to do not lie. That's about something that is already happened, and the statement I am saying, as soon as I say it, is either a truth or a lie. And so that's why we want to include things that are more similar to lehara or lehetib in it being future-oriented, like bal yachel devaro. So anything about the future is included, but anything about the past is excluded. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Ravin amar kera lo nefesh ki tishaba lebate bisfatayim misha shevuah kodemet labitui velo shabitui kodemet lashevuah yasa zeh achalti velo achalti shemaaseh kodem lashevuah. Rabbi Yitzchak, a different Rabbi Yitzchak bar Ravin, gives a different explanation of why not to switch it around, and he explains because the pasuk itself here says any person ki tishaba, he makes a swear, so he makes a swear, and he says, I am not going to eat. So that includes only a case where the taking of the vow comes before the utterance, meaning the subject of the utterance. The vow comes before the action that he's going to do or not do. That means it's future-oriented. I'm making the vow now that I will not eat, and so the vow is now, the action is in the future, and that's the order in the pasuk. Tishaba, first the vow, and then the whatever you are swearing about. That makes sense. That should be included, but not the other way around, where the action already happened. I ate yesterday already, and now I'm making the vow now. Well, that's the utterance, the thing that I'm uttering, the subject about which I am speaking, happened already, and then the Shevuah comes after. So if I say achalti velo achalti, I ate or I did not eat, then the action already happened before the Shevuah, but in the pasuk, the Shevuah comes before the mention of the action, and that's why it should be future-oriented or included, and past-oriented Shevuot are not included, according to Rabbi Ishmael. Tenor Banan. Now, Baraita is going to expand on some of the laws that we learned from this pasuk. Ha'adam bishvuah perat le'anus v'ne'alam perat le'mezid. It says if a person makes a shevuah, means he knows what he's doing. But if it's circumstances beyond his control, he totally had no idea what was going on. So then that's anus. He doesn't even bring a korban. A korban is only bishogeg, which is in between. It's negligent. He should have known. He should have realized. But if he's zero realization and totally beyond his control, then he doesn't bring a korban. If it's mezid also, he does not bring a korban. And he forgot, so that excludes mezid. So we're excluding all the way something that's totally beyond his control. We're excluding something that's intentional. One only brings a korban for the middle, where it's he forgot, but he was somewhat negligent. Mimenu shint'alema mimenu shevuah yachol shint'alema mimenu chayfetz tamod omar b'shvuah v'ne'alam al ha'adem shevuah chayab v'no chayab al ha'adem chayfetz. So the vow was hidden from him. So we learn from here one only brings a korban olev yored if the vow was forgotten by him. The details of the vow he forgot. Now what if he didn't forget the vow? He knew he forgot the vow, but what he forgot was the item, what the item is. So does they also bring korban? So we say no, because the pasuk says bishvuah v'ne'alam. He's something that he said with an oath and he forgot, meaning he forgot the oath, and not if he forgot the object of the oath. The Gemara will expand on what this means. Amar mor ha'adam bishvuah perat le'anus hechi dameh. So first you said when a person makes a vow, so that means the person makes the vow, and he knows he made the vow, then he is and he violates it by bishogeg, he brings a korban. But not if he has no idea and it's beyond his control, then he's anus. What would be a case like that? Kederav kahana v'rab aseh ki avu kaimeh mikameh derav. Mor amar shevuata dehachi amarav. Mor amar shevuata dehachi amarav. Ki atu lekameh derav. Amar kechad minayhu. Amar le'idach v'hana b'shikra ishte ba'i. Amar le'libach ansach. Fantastic example about Rav Kahana and Rav Aseh. They both were students in front of Rav. And sometimes Rav would give a lesson, and then afterwards, the two students would be arguing about exactly what Rav says. And one rabbi, Rav Kahana, would say, I make a vow that this is what Rav said. And the other student would say, no, I make a vow that Rav said something else. And then they would come to Rav to clarify, did you say A or did you say B? And he would say, oh, I said A, like Rav Kahana, for example. And then Rav Aseh would say, or whichever way it was, wait, so does that mean I made a false oath? I was so sure when I made the oath that I heard you say B, that I even made an oath because I was 100% sure that that's what you said. So I didn't mean to say a false oath. I was totally convinced at that time that this was true, and I made a vow about it. So what about it? Am I guilty now? And I've said, no, your heart compelled you, your mind compelled you. That's really what you remember. That's really what you thought. And you weren't trying to make a false oath. You thought that your oath was totally true, and it's totally beyond your control, right? You had no idea that this was false, and therefore you're exempt. So that would be an example of something that's anus, when someone is 100% convinced and they make a false oath, so that's anus. ונעלם ממנו, שנתעלם ממנו שבועה, יכול שנתעלם ממנו חפץ, תלמוד לומר, בשבועה ונעלם ממנו, על הלם שבועה חייב, ואינו חייב על הלם חפץ. So now we're going to explain this part of the Baraita that teaches that one brings a korban only if the Shevuah was hidden from him. So what about if he knows he made the Shevuah, but it's the object of the Shevuah that was hidden from him? That's why the pasuk says, "B'shua v'ne'elam mimenu." One only brings a korban for forgetting the vow, not for forgetting the item. So what does this mean?
מחקו עליה במערבה, והשלמה שבועה משכחת לה בלא חפץ. כגון דאמר שבועה שלא אכל פתחיתין, וכסבור שאוכל כאמר, דשבועתה אין נשה, חפשה דחיר. אלא חפץ בלא שבועה, הכי דמה. In the West, in Eretz Yisrael, when they heard this baraita, they laughed at it. They did not agree that this was an authentic baraita because it doesn't make any sense. Yes, we understand how you can have one of the cases where you can have a shevuah and you lack awareness about the shevuah, even though you don't have a lack of awareness regarding the item. You remember the item, but you don't remember the details of the oath. For example, if someone makes a vow and says, I will not eat wheat bread. Now, he said, I will not eat wheat bread. But he remembered wrongly. He thought he said, I will eat wheat bread. And then he eats it thinking that he fulfilled the vow, but really he violated the vow. Okay, so that makes sense. He would be chayav. He would have to bring a korban olev yored because by mistake he misremembered the vow. He thought I said, I will. Really, he said, I will not. So in that case, Shevuata inashe, he forgot the vow, although he remembered the item. He knew it had to do with wheat bread. He just forgot whether the vow was a yes or a no. But how can you have a case of chefetz, forgetting the item, but you remembered the vow? You remember the vow, but you forgot the item? Hechi dameh. How can you have such a case that you would say, eno chayav al helem chefetz? If you forget the object of the vow, then you don't bring a korban. What would be a case where you forgot the object of the vow? And so we suggest, כגון דאמר שבועה שלא אוכל פתחיתין, וכסבור של שעורים כאמר, דשבועתה דחיר לה, חפשה אינשה. So maybe it's a case where he says, I make a vow, I will not eat wheat bread. And then he misremembered and he thought he made a vow about barley bread, that I'm not going to eat barley bread, because there he remembers the vow, but he forgot what item the vow applies to. But that would not be a good example. If he forgot what the vow applies to, then he's forgetting the vow. He forgot the details of the vow. What difference does it make whether he said, I will or will not eat, or whether he says, I will eat wheat bread or barley bread? In both cases, he's forgetting the details of what the vow is. So that's also forgetting the vow. Rather, Rabbi Elazar from Eretz Yisrael said, these cases are the same, and one would be liable to both, and there is no distinction between forgetting the vow and forgetting the item. If you forget the item, that's part of the vow, so then you forgot the vow. And so in Eretz Yisrael, they disagree with this baraita and think that one is liable. In both of those cases, they are effectively the same. Matkif la Rav Yosef, alma chefes belo shevuah, la mashkachat la, v'hamashkachat la kegon, de'amar, shevuah shelo achal patchitin, ve'oshit yado lasal, litol pat seorin, v'alta biyado shel chitin. וכסבור שעורין היא ואכלה, דשבועתה דחיר לה, חפשה הוא דלת ידע לה. Rav Yosef, who's from Bavel, he objects to what Rabbi Elazar said and says, what, are you telling me that it's impossible to have a case where you forgot what the item is, right? Is it impossible to have a case where you forgot the item, but you did not forget the Shevuah? I have a case where I remember the Shevuah, but I have a mistake regarding the item. For example, let's say someone says, I make a vow that I will not eat wheat bread. And then he puts his hand into a basket to get barley bread, intending that it's going to be barley bread. He thinks that this basket is full of barley bread. But turns out it's actually wheat bread that comes up in his hand. He grabs something that he thought was barley bread, but in his hand is actually wheat bread, and he's eating it. And he thinks he's eating barley bread, so he's not violating anything. So he remembers his vow clearly. He remembers exactly what he says. I made a vow that I will not eat wheat bread. And he's eating away, thinking that he's eating barley bread. But by mistake, he's eating the wrong thing. So that's a case where he remembers the vow perfectly, but regarding the item, he is unaware that this is the wrong item that he got. So that's the case where the Baraita says one is not liable to a korban olev yored because he remembered the vow, he just doesn't know what he's eating.
Amar le'Abaye, kelu mechayabt le'korban, ela amay detafis biyadeh, ha'elam shevu'ahu. Abaye objects to Rav Yosef, and he says, no, there's no distinction. When you make someone liable to bring korban olev yored, is it not because he's holding something that he's not allowed to eat in his hand? And therefore, that's also called forgetfulness of the oath. He thinks, whatever he thinks that this item is what it's called, whether it's wheat bread or barley bread, he thinks that his vow does not apply to the thing that he's eating in his hand. And so therefore, it's a mistake of understanding the vow. The vow, it really does apply to the thing in his hand. He thinks for whatever reason it doesn't. So that's a mistake in understanding and applying the vow. And therefore, that's the same as making a mistake in a vow, and he has to bring a korban. That's what Abaye says in one version. Lishana achadina, another version of what Abaye says, basically the same thing in different words. Amar l'Abaye l'Rav Yosef, sof sof korban dekamay te'ala, dahai pita, miha te'alem shivu'ahu. He says, in the end, the korban that he's going to bring because of this bread is because he forgot about the oath. He knows he made an oath, but he doesn't remember, he doesn't realize that the oath does apply to this bread that he's holding because he mismatched the item with what it actually is. But in the end, it's a mistake in the oath because he thinks the oath does not apply to it, but really it does apply to it. And therefore, this is called a forgetfulness of the oath because he has forgotten, he doesn't know that the oath applies to it when it really does. And so therefore, Abaye does not agree with Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef amar lach, kevan dechi yada le dechitin hu, parish mineh, helem chayfetz hu. Rav Yosef says, no, there is a distinction here. If someone would see him and tell him, hey, don't you realize that the roll that you're holding is a wheat roll? If he, as soon as he hears that, he would leave it. He would put it down because he thought it was barley and therefore he was permitted. Now, if you tell him, oh, it's wheat, so then he'll put it down. Meaning, when you correct him regarding the item, then he'll remove himself. That means it was a mistake in the item. If you would tell him, on the other hand, you made a vow about not eating wheat, he would say, yes, I know, I'm very aware. I made a vow that I'm not going to eat wheat bread, but this is barley. That's totally fine. So if you would remind him of his vow, he would keep eating it. It's when so therefore there's no mistake regarding the vow. It's when you tell him there's a mistake of what you're eating. This item in your hand is you think is wheat bread, is barley bread, is really wheat bread. He would stop. So you see, there is a correct distinction between a mistake in the item and a mistake in the vow. Now we have a follow-up question. Rava asks Rav Nachman, what if he makes a mistake regarding both? Meaning, he thought, he said, I won't eat, let's say, right? He said, he thought he said, I won't eat, and then he remembered, he thought he said, I will eat. And then he's holding something that he thinks is barley bread, but really it's wheat bread. So he's making two mistakes. He actually said, I will not eat wheat bread. And now he remembers saying, I will eat wheat bread, but actually the thing that's in his hand, he thinks is barley bread anyway. So he's making two mistakes. What about that? Would he bring a korban or not bring a korban, according to this Baraita, assuming that Rav Yosef is right, that we can make such a distinction? So Rav Nachman answers, Amar le, hareh alem shevuah biyado v'chayav. So Rav Nachman says, well, he had a mistake about the vow. And we said, if he has a mistake about the vow, he thought I said I won't eat, but he said I thought I won't eat, but really, he really said I won't eat, but he thought he said I will eat.
that's a mistake about the vow, so therefore he's liable. But we can challenge. Adraba, hareh alem chayfes beyado patur. But there's a mistake in the item, and therefore he should be patur. He thought that he's holding barley bread. Really, he's holding wheat bread and making a violation because it's actually wheat bread. So you could say he's patur because it's that. So that's really the question we ask again. Rav Nachman didn't quite answer it because he's making a mistake regarding the oath and making a mistake regarding the item. So that's the question. Is it chayav because it's a mistake in the oath, or is it patur because it's a mistake in the item? Amar Rav Ashi chazenan, mechamat shivua kaparish hareh elem shivua biyado v'chayav. Mechamat chefes kaparish hareh elem chefes biyado upatur. Rav Ashi, let's see. We could test it out. If when you tell him, hey, you made a vow about not eating wheat bread, if he would put it down and stop, that shows that his basic mistake was about the vow, and he would be liable. On the other hand, if the person correcting him says, hey, don't look at what you're holding, that's not barley bread, that's wheat bread, and he would put it down, that means his primary error was regarding the item, and therefore he's patur. So yes, he might have a mistake in both, but which one is the primary error? Well, to test it out, which one would he respond to, and which one would he not respond to? Amar le Ravina Rav Ashi, kilum parish meshivua ela mishum chayfes, kilum parish mechefes ela mishum shivua ela la shena. However, Ravina challenges that answer of Rav Ashi and says, no, you cannot make such a distinction, because when you tell him, oh, you made a vow, you correct him about the vow. Didn't you make a vow not to eat wheat bread? And he puts it down. So that means he must also realize that the thing that he's holding is not barley bread, is wheat bread, because that's why he's putting it down. So he has a realization that he's holding the wrong item. And the same thing the other way around. If you say, hey, isn't that wheat bread you're holding, not barley bread, and then he puts it down, that means he's remembering also that he made a vow not to eat it. So it could be that the prompt is about one of the things, but that prompt caused him to remember also the other thing. So really, he's remembering both. He has to remember both in order to know that he should put it down. So therefore, there's actually this distinction of Rav Ashi is not a distinction, and we do not successfully answer the question of Rava.
Be'amine Rava me Rav Nachman, ezo hi shigigat shebuat bitui l'she'avar, idiyada mezidhu, idilayada anusu. Rava asked Rav Nachman a pretty basic question. What would be a case where if you made a shevuat bitui, like I'm going to eat, and then you don't eat, where one would be liable as a shogeg and would have to bring a korban oleh v'yored? If he knew that he made the oath and that this was prohibited what he was doing, then that's mezid. And if he does it b'mezid, then he doesn't bring a korban. And if he does not know that he made the vow, he totally forgot about it, then that's called ones, beyond his control, and he also does not bring a korban. So what would be a case where he actually would bring a korban as a shogeg? אמר לה באומר, יודע אני ששבועה זו אסורה, אבל איני יודע אם חייבים עליה קורבן או לאו. And Rav Nachman answered, it's when the person says, I know I made a vow, and I know that what I'm about to do is prohibited by my vow. However, I did not know the punishment for what I'm about to do. I knew it was prohibited, but I didn't know that I would have to bring a korban. I didn't know that a korban was the punishment for violating this bishogeg. I didn't know it was that serious. Maybe if I knew it was that serious, then I wouldn't have done it. So that also is called bishogeg. Rava then asks Rav Nachman, Kiman, Kimun baz de amar shigat korban shema shigaga. Rava says, Rav Nachman, who are you following? Are you following Munbaz? There's a machloket in Masechet Shabbat between Munbaz and the Chachamim regarding Ilchot Shabbat. Let's say someone violates Shabbat, but he doesn't know, he knew it was prohibited, what he's about to do. He's cooking an omelet. He knew that's prohibited, but he didn't know that the punishment for doing so b'shogeg is a korban. Is that considered shogeg or not? Munbaz says that's considered shogeg, even though he knew it was prohibited, but he didn't know the extent of the punishment, that's called shogeg. The rabbis disagree, and they say, no, that's called mezid. If you know it's prohibited, that's called mezid. It's only shogeg if you didn't realize it was Shabbat, or you didn't know that cooking an omelet on Shabbat is prohibited. Now, so Rav Nachman, that's what Rabbi is asking, are you following Munbaz, who says that not knowing that it's liable to a korban is called shogeg, and that's what you're applying here also, that I knew that I made a swear, I knew it was prohibited to do what I'm about to do, but I didn't know that b'shogeg would bring a korban. So are you following that opinion? And Rav Nachman answers, no. Afilu tema Rabbanan, I can even follow Rabbanan in Masechet Shabbat, and they would agree here regarding the Shevuah. Ad kana peligi Rabbanan ale demun baz ela bechol Torah kula delav chidushu. Aval hachad chidushu de bechol Torah kula lashkechan lav de maite korban de afinim avodah zara v'hacha maite afilu Rabbanan modu. Even the rabbis might agree, and the rabbis only disagree with Munbaz in all other areas of the Torah. And the rabbis say, in order to be bishogeg, you have to not know that what you're doing is prohibited at all. Because in the rest of the Torah, there's no chidush. In all the other laws, when you have to bring a korban chatat, that is associated that if you did it b'mezid, you would get karet. So everybody knows, this is something that I would get karet if it was b'mezid. So then it's obvious, more or less obvious to anyone who knows basic principles of halacha, that if doing it b'shogeg is a korban. And so therefore, in all those cases, a person is expected to know that he would bring a korban hatat if he did it b'shogeg. But in the case of a shivuah, that is not like the rest of the Torah. In all the rest of the Torah, we never find a lav. A lav is something that's just a lo ta'aseh. Usually a lav does not get a korban. Only if it's a lav that has karet, a serious lav, then it would bring a korban. But if it's not so serious and doesn't require karet, it's just a plain old lav, then you don't usually bring a korban. Shevuot bitui is an exception. So because it's an exception, I might think that it could be that the rabbis would agree that regarding a shivuah, that this, if you knew this were prohibited but didn't know the korban, that would also be b'shogeg. Now, how come in the rest of the Torah we say that one brings a korban only if it's karet? Because we learned it from avodah zarah, which is punishable by karet, and if it's b'shogeg, one brings a korban chatat, and so we learn that from all other cases. So in other cases, you're expected to know. But here, in the Shevuah, one brings a korban even though it's unexpected because it's only a lav. And so even the rabbis might agree with me here that not knowing that it's a korban, that's called shogeg. And so that's why Rav Nachman says it's a fine answer, and it can be according to Munbaz, and it can also be according to Rabbanan. But I mean, there's a paradox here, interestingly, which is that if you know that the punishment for saying a Shevuot bitui and violating, if you know that the punishment is a korban, then that's called mezid, and you can't bring a korban. If you don't know that the punishment is a korban and you do it because thinking that's only prohibited, but you didn't know that the punishment is a korban, that's called b'shogeg, and then you bring a korban. So you only bring a korban if you didn't know that you had to bring korban. If you knew you had to bring korban, then you don't bring one because that's mezid. All right, that's an interesting paradox. Next question. Nishba al kikar umistaken aleha mahu. What if someone makes a vow, I'm not going to eat this bread, and then he's starving to death. He's about to die if he doesn't eat this. What about that? And then he eats it. Does that violate his oath? Does he have to bring a korban? And the Rava says, mistaken lishdire mor. If his life is in danger, then you have to permit him. Of course, this is not one of the big three that you die before violating. It's a vow. Okay, vow is serious, but of course, you'd have to eat it if your life is in danger. So that's not a good question. Rather, let's ask the question this way: what if a person is hungry? He's not going to die. He's just very hungry, and in his hunger, he forgot about the oath and he ate it. So what do we say about that? Is that called shogeg? Or is he honest? And because he was so hungry, that's what could only think about, eating it, and he forgot about the Shevuah. Amar le tenena shami diato mebi korban al shigato lo shami diato and mebi korban al shigato. Rava says we have the answer in a baraita, which is a very important principle that says if someone acted b'shogeg, they have to bring a korban only if, had they known, they wouldn't have done it. So shav, if he would have shav, sat and not done it, or made teshubah, had he known it, then he brings a korban because he didn't realize. But let's say a person says, happens to be, I forgot I made the Shevuot. But even if I remembered that I made the Shevuot, I would have violated it anyway. He has no remorse, this person. That person does not bring a korban but for doing it b'shogeg. And therefore, that's the answer here. This person was very hungry, not on his deathbed, he was very hungry, and it happens to be he forgot the oath. But even if he remembered the oath, he was so hungry, he would have eaten it anyway, and therefore he cannot bring a korban. He doesn't get the privilege of being able to be exempt by a korban. Amar Shemuel, Gamar b'libo sarich sheyosi bisfatav, shenemar lebate bisfatayim. Shemuel now has a principle. Let's say someone thought in their mind and said, thought that I'm going to make an oath not to eat tomorrow. So is that sufficient to create a valid oath? The answer is no. He actually has to pronounce it with his lips, as the pasuk says, to utter with his lips. So it's not enough to think about a vow, you actually have to say the vow. Me'etibeh, a challenge against Shemuel. Bisfatayim velo belev, gamar belibo minayin, tamodoma lechol asher yibate adam bishvuah. A challenge to Shemuel from a braita that says, bisfatayim, you have to say it out loud and not in your mind. So far, this is actually consistent and proves Shemuel. But then the Baraita continues on to add something that seems contradictory, actually. We'll ask about that in a second. What if he only decided in his mind that he's going to make an oath? Is that valid? And the answer is yes, because it says, Lechol, anything, asher yebate bishvuah, anything. So it's an inclusive word that comes to say, even if he just decided in his mind. Now we wonder about this. Hagufa kashya. This braita seems self-contradictory. Amat bisvatayim velo balev. Vadar amar gamar belev minayin. First you say, you have to say it with your lips and not in your mind. And then you ask, and how do you know that also if it's in your mind, you would be liable? So what do you mean? You just said that you're not liable. Why are you then trying to prove that you are liable even if it's just in your mind? Amar Rav Sheshat, halakashya, hachika amar. Rav Sheshat misunderstood the Baraita. Here's what it actually means. Bisfatayim velo shegamar belibo lehosi bisfata velo hosi. Gamar belibo seta minayin tamodoma lechol asher yebate. Rav Sheshat says, in fact, it's talking about two different cases. The first one is, we learned from Bisfatayim that if you decided in your mind that you're going to utter a vow, so you haven't uttered it yet, but just in your mind you say, you know what, in 1 minute, I'm going to say this vow. But you never actually said it. Then you're not liable because you didn't accept the vow in your mind. You just decided that you're going to say the vow, but you never said it. So there's no vow there. However, if you decided to commit yourself to a vow in your mind, although you didn't say it, then you are liable because it says, Lechol asher yevate, anything a person expresses, even in his mind. So the difference is, if I decide in my mind I'm not going to eat tomorrow, I'm liable. If I decide in my mind I'm going to say a vow with my mouth, and I didn't say it, I'm not liable. So this does contradict Shemuel, because Shemuel says, if I decided something in my mind, I'm not liable. But this says, if I decided to take that I'm making this oath, even though I made it only in my mind, then one is liable. Ela l'Shmuel kashya. So we have a problem against Shemuel. Amar Rav Sheshat, teris ve'ema hachi, bisfatayim, velo shegamar belibo lehosi pat chitin vehosi pat seorin. Gamar belibo lehosi pat chitin vehosi pat setam minayin, tamodoma lechol asher yibate ha'adam. Rav Sheshat says we can answer the question by re-explaining that Baraita as follows. The first case, what do we learn from Bisfatayim, that you have to say something? That's talking about a case where someone was thinking one thing but said something else. In his mind he was thinking, I'm going to prohibit myself from wheat bread. But when he actually said it, he said barley bread. In that case, there's no vow at all, because in order for a vow to be valid, his mind has to match what he says. And here he was thinking one thing, said something totally different, so there's no vow at all. However, if he decided in his mind, you know what, I am going to say that I'm going to prohibit myself from wheat bread. That's in his mind, he was thinking wheat bread. In the end, he said, I'm not going to eat bread. He didn't say wheat bread. He didn't specify when he said it. In that case, the vow is valid,
because it says lechol asher, so it comes to include, and that will apply only to wheat bread, because he had in mind wheat bread, and he said, I'm making a vow about bread, and bread includes wheat bread, so we do take into account what he had in his mind. As long as he said something general, then we can apply the specific thing that he had in mind. But if he was thinking one thing and said something contradictory, then there is no vow at all. That's what the Baraita was teaching. But this is consistent with Shemuel, because in both cases in the Baraita, he did in fact say something. If he just thought about things all day long but never said anything, then certainly there would be no vow, and that's consistent with what Shemuel said. And now we ask one last challenge against Shemuel from a Baraita, against Shemuel, who says that it's not enough just to think about a vow, you actually have to express it with your mouth. אין לי אלא שהוציא בשפתיו, גמר בליבו מניין, תלמוד לומר כל נדיב לב. The pasuk in Devarim says that that which is gone out of your lips, you shall observe and do. So from here I know that for sure, if you actually say a vow, then you're obligated to it. What about if you only think about it in your heart? Well, their pasuk says, Kol Nediv Lev. This pasuk is regarding the contributions that people gave to the building of the Mishkan. And it says there, anyone who was willing-hearted, which means even if they just willed it in their heart, they are obligated to give those things. So you see from here that just thinking it in one's mind is sufficient to obligate oneself. That's against Shemuel, who said, if you think about it and don't express it, you're not obligated. So how can we reconcile this with Shemuel? No, there it's different, because it says explicitly, anyone who was willing in his heart. So regarding contributions to the Mishkan, that even if you think about it, you have to give it. But regarding Shevuot in general, it's not the rule. The Mishkan is exceptional. V'nigmar mina. Okay, so the Mishkan is exceptional, but since it says it there, why can't we use that as a paradigm and learn, since you're obligated, if you think about giving a gift to the Mishkan, so too you're obligated regarding any Shevuah that you make in your heart. Mishum dehavu teruma v'kadashim shnei ketubim habim ke'achad v'chol shnei ketubim habim ke'achad en melamedin. Because there is in fact another context in which just thinking about it makes one obligated. What we just saw is kodashim, donating things to the Mishkan. But there is yet another pasuk regarding teruma that goes to a kohen, and pasuk says v'nechshav lachem terumatchem. You can think about the teruma, even if you just think about giving teruma, it's already obligated. And so you have two different verses and two different contexts that teach you the same thing. And there's a rule. Kol shnei ketubim gim ke'achad en melamedin. If the Torah said only one paradigm, so then you could say, oh, that's if it says the law once, that's a paradigm for everywhere else. But why would it say it twice? If it says it twice, that means those are the only two exceptions, and you do not learn it to anywhere else. Otherwise, if it was supposed to be a paradigm, and the Torah could have said it once, and I would have learned from everywhere else. Okay, that's a good answer. According to the methodology of those who say that two verses cannot be used as a paradigm. But there's another methodology that says two verses can be used as a paradigm for everywhere else. So what will that opinion say? Havu chulin ve'kodashim ve'chulin la gamrinan. We're comparing chulin, things that are not holy. Just any vow that you make is not particularly holy. I will eat, I will sleep. And you're comparing that to the Mishkan, which is kodashim. And there's a general rule that we do not learn laws regarding chulin from laws that have to do with consecrated things. And that's why we do not use that as a paradigm. And since you do not use it as a paradigm, therefore, this is an exception. Kol nidiv lev. Yes, when it comes to donating things to the Mishkan, even if you think about it, you have to give it. But regarding everything else, which is what Shemuel was talking about, just thinking about it is not sufficient. You actually have to give it. Baruch Adonai, you have to actually say it. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.